Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code KNUCKLER. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. Free contests every week. Check it out. I love that very unique Parlay Play Fantasy Sports platform. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 131 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. And we've got UFC Vegas 90 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
And a lot of fun stuff this week. I'm watching PFL 1 right now, right to the side of me. The PFL season has begun, so that's going to be weekly fun. We got one Fight Night 21 and LFA 181 tomorrow, Cage Warriors and KSW. For my picks on all major MMA events, combat sports event, boxing events, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. The card this week will get started actually at 3 p.m. on Saturday. And so I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord from 1 to 2 p.m. and onward doing the weekly DFS / sports betting Q&A. Show up. Let's talk about UFC Vegas 90. And next week is UFC 300. It's going to be a big special show. There's plenty of things to talk about. Right now, Marcelo Gomes is beating up on Daniel James. All right. Daniel James was the underdog in this one. There's plenty to talk about. I at least think last week in Atlantic City, I thought Manon Furio was the rightful winner. Obviously, I think it was a close fight. But I know that people are complaining once again about, main events and the frequency of these events for UFC fight nights. I don't care. I don't even care if it's a boring fight. I'm interested in who wins between Erin Blanchfield and Manon Furio. I don't really, not every fight has to be exciting. Sometimes I'm just interested to see who wins and who's on their way up. And that was the case for the main event this past week. We've got 13 fights on the card for UFC Vegas 90, starting off with a middleweight matchup between Dylan Budka and Cesar Almeida. Gene Matsumoto at bantamweight against Dan Argueta, 9-1 as a pro. Piera Rodriguez, 9-1 as a pro against Cynthia Calvillo. Bantamweight, Pedro Falco against Victor Hugo, 24-4 as a pro. Norma Dumont at bantamweight, and the return of Jermaine De Randami, 10-4. I think it's been like 4 years, and Daniel James has turned it around on Marcelo Gomes and is laying some heavy ground and pound now. So this is half commentating tonight as well. But Jermaine De Randami back in the UFC. Court McGee at welterweight against Alex the Great White Morono. Lightweight Trevor Peek bringing the heat against Charlie Campbell. Lucas Brzeski against Walter Walker in a heavyweight fight. Walter Walker 11-0 as a pro. Lightweight Ignacio Balhamondez against Christos Giagos. Morgan Charrier, I'm assuming that is how it's pronounced because he is French.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And he's going to be taking on Chepe Mariscal. The co-main event, a featherweight matchup where apparently there's some very lame beef and bad blood between these two. Alexander the Great Hernandez against Damon Jackson. And then the middleweight, late notice step-in rematch fight of the upset win that he pulled the first time around. Brendan Allen with his chance for revenge against Chris the Action Man Curtis. Daniel James just won by TKO, by the way. I'm pretty sure I'm 6 for 6 on my PFL picks starting off the evening. So let's jump right into it. Oh, yeah. I missed out on the Melissa Tonya Mullins and Nora Cornole. That's actually the fight leading off the card. Tapology has an ad in between that, so that's why I didn't see it below. So that's where we're going to start. Melissa Tonya Mullins, Nora Cornole. And let's see here. Cornole is the plus 270 underdog. Mullins, the minus 340 favorite. These are, some of these prelims, you got to start off on Tapology, to get the regional feel. 6-0 as a pro, 3 wins by knockout, 3 wins by decision. She has a win already in the UFC against Irina Alekseeva by unanimous decision October of last year. Came in via Aries FC. She wasn't the champion there, but, she fought there twice, and the combined record of her last 2 opponents there was 13-4. So, already, success in Aries FC, that's impressive, coming in and getting a win, not even on the Contender Series, but actually on the UFC Fight Night platform. That's a happy debut for anybody. Nora Cornole, 7-1 as a pro, 34 years old, currently ranked 19th in the world at women's bantamweight, according to Tapology. She's coming in from UAE Warriors, most notably. And already has a win on the UFC Fight Night platform as well against Jocelyn Edwards. Statistically, in this one, Mullins, she outstruck Irina Alekseeva 52-48. She did get taken down and knocked down once. Cornole, who is 2 years older, landed 40 strikes to Jocelyn Edwards' 18. She did get taken down 5 times. In this situation, I think you probably... I don't know why this is such a lopsided... Why these odds are so lopsided. I guess you would favor Mullen in just being, slightly younger, having slightly more of a prospect status, but she did get damaged, in her first fight. Cornole, on the other hand, gets a win over Jocelyn Edwards, who, has had a lot of fights in the UFC. She's actually 4-3 in the UFC. That's just, a really tough one to opt against. I don't know. I think, Cornole at least could win, 40 of these out of 100, so plus 270, hit it. Just off of the quality of opponents that they've each beaten in the UFC, I think that Cornole proved a lot more in beating Jocelyn Edwards than Melissa Mullins has in beating Irina Alekseeva. And I think at this point, this early in their UFC careers and really with very limited professional records, I think that that's as good as you're going to get as far as an outcome. And that's about as far as I care to pick that. If I would say that this fight probably goes the distance. That's minus 225. And I guess I go Cornole by decision. That is, for some reason, they don't have that. But Mullins by decision is minus 125, so you're getting it better than that. Next up, let's go Cesar Almeida and Dylan Butka at middleweight. Butka is the minus 148 favorite. Cesar Almeida, the plus 124 underdog. Now, I want to start off with Cesar Almeida because I think my friend Cody there over at Blood Money MMA Bets made some good points on the internet this week. Almeida, 4-0 as a pro, 36 years old, granted. He had that win on the Contender Series against Lucas Fernando August of last year. He was supposed to fight Christian Leroy Duncan and Josh Fremd in between this. And both, it was actually his surgery that he had to get that ended the Christian Leroy Duncan matchup, but then Josh Fremd pulled out of the next one. And that was supposed to happen. That was a replacement. So Buka's the replacement. Almeida has a fantastic kickboxing record that includes a trilogy with Alex Pereira, who he beat by decision back in 2013. He lost 2 others to Pereira, but this is the biggest point, is that Cesar Almeida is a really, really good kickboxer. And that came through in his Contender Series fight. He landed 71 strikes to Lucas Fernando's 28. He did get taken down 3 times. I would think that's to be expected. Here's the problem. Butka has the 1 win on the Contender Series. He is 7-2 as a pro, only 24 years old. And came in through, he fought in LFA a handful of times. B2 Fighting Series. That's a solid organization. I think I've talked to somebody who, I know I've had someone on the show who is teammates with Dylan Budka, but, there's a little less here. Like, I think that Dylan Budka is, obviously probably the more well-rounded fighter, but I think Cesar Almeida is a way better kickboxer than Dylan Budka is an MMA fighter right now, just because, if Cesar Almeida is going to get some wins in the UFC, it has to happen now at 36 years old and just coming in from the Contender Series. But I think that Dylan Budka is not good enough right now to overcome the striking advantage that Cesar Almeida is going to have. Will he maybe, get Almeida down a couple of times? Yeah, I think that this very well could resemble Almeida versus Lucas Fernando. Maybe a little less strikes from Almeida. Maybe, Book has a little bit more success slowing the offense of Almeida. But I still think that that's the most likely route that this goes. I would say that Cesar Almeida wins this fight 55 to 60 times out of 100. Give me plus 124. And I go like Almeida by decision plus 275. And I think if you're going Budka, I think you go by decision too. I think both these first fights go the distance. Budka by decision plus 165. Obviously, I like the Almeida number way more. Moving right along, we got Dan Argueta and Gene Matsumoto in a bantamweight matchup. Matsumoto is the minus 162 favorite. Argueta the plus 136 underdog. Let's start off with Gene Matsumoto. Won on the Contender Series against Casey Tanner. September of 2023 by unanimous decision, landing 100 strikes to Tanner's 99. He did get taken down twice. Born in 1999, excuse me, before the UFC. And by the way, he's 14-0 as a professional. Important, 24 years old. Well on his way up. Came into the LFA ranks. His last fight there was March of 2023. He beat Marlon Basilio with a second-round guillotine. SFT before that. Splitting it up, 3 knockouts, 5 submissions, 6 decision wins in his career as a professional. Argueta, 9-1 as a pro, nicknamed the Determined. Weirdly has had 2 straight no contests. What do you do about that? He's 9-1 as a pro, but has 2 no contests. And his last win in the UFC was January 2023 against Nick Aguirre. So the no contest against Ronnie Lawrence and Miles Johns, like what do you do about those? Like I guess those are good. I think that those are good performances. I guess like it's hard to trust a guy that's coming off of 2 straight no contests. In fact, let's see here.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
Honestly, that sound drop was not perfect for my feelings on it. It's again, they're not losses. They're not exactly wins because you still don't know. 4 takedowns, 47 strikes against Nick Aguirre. His UFC debut was a loss to Damon Jackson by unanimous decision. Yeah, I mean... This is a very tough one to call. Gene Matsumoto. I don't know. I do think that it is Matsumoto. I don't know. This is weird. I think that, like, I very well may be wrong, very wrong on Gene Matsumoto. Maybe this is a big debut for him, and it'd be a solid win to get in your debut. But I just think, like, the weirdness of this, it makes me want to jump into the plus money. I don't know. I think this might be like a 50-50 fight, 45-55. Either way, Argueta plus 136, I think I'm going for it. I don't feel super strongly about it. This one's really a toss-up. It's just weird to have someone coming off of those 2, straight results. And then a guy like Matsumoto who's so, fresh into the UFC. But, like, it wasn't like he was able to stifle the offense of Casey Tanner, on the Contender Series. That would concern me against a guy like Argueta who's been in the UFC and fought several high-quality names. Or, medium quality, but high quality for a guy that's not of, huge quality. It's a solid test for the Mile Joneses and the Ronnie Lawrences. So that's where I'm landing on that one. As far as outcome, I'm not picking a prop for that one either. I think Matsumoto, my decision might make the most sense. And I guess probably Argueta by decision might be the best pick as well. But again, not feeling strongly about that. For DFS purposes, I could see myself liking, maybe both of these dudes depending on the price. I do think Cesar Almeida is going to be a steal this week. Forgot to touch on that. Next up, we got at women's strawweight, Piera Rodriguez and Cynthia Calvillo. Cynthia Calvillo is the plus 110 underdog. Piera Rodriguez, the minus 130 favorite. Let's start with Piera Rodriguez. 9-1 as a pro, 3-1 in the UFC. Started off in the Contender Series, outstriking Valeska Machado 43-36 with 3 takedowns. Then got unanimous decision victories over Sam Hughes and Kay Hansen, where she landed a combined 133 strikes and 8 takedowns. Last time out, though, was quickly overwhelmed by Jillian Robertson April of last year. Got subbed with an armbar in round 2 and some nice Jillian Robertson style. That was a fight where Pierre really struggled. Calvillo, born in 1987, unfortunately, on a 5-fight losing streak. Against Caitlin Sermonara, formerly Caitlin Chukagian, lost by unanimous decision, got knocked out in the first round by Jessica Andrade, knocked out in the second round by Andrea Lee. Then her last 2 fights against Nina Nunes, loses by split decision. She outstruck Nina Nunes 48-39 and got 3 takedowns. Against Lupi Godinez, April of last year at UFC 287, split decision loss again, outstriking Lupi 104-87 with 1 takedown. So those are 2 very close fights that she lost by split decision that, at least on paper, you could make a very strong argument that she won. Round by round, I do remember those being close fights. So, sometimes those were a toss-up. It's kind of for that reason, though, that, anytime you can get Cynthia Calvillo at plus money against doable competition, and I do think Piera Rodriguez is still that. Calvillo, even regardless of the losing streak, the last 2 times out, it was again, you remember how competent she can be, in the all-around game. And I think that is worth taking at a higher reward of plus 110 against Piera Rodriguez, who, we saw some real flaws with last time out against Jillian Robertson. Did wins against Sam Hughes and Kay Hansen propel you up to that level of Calvillo? Calvillo's been in there with some of the best in the game at women's strawweight and at flyweight as well. So I think one more time on a 5-fight losing streak, I think Cynthia Calvillo actually takes this fight 55 to 60 times out of 100. Plus 110, give it to me all day.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
No reason for Cynthia Calvillo to be scared. She's been in there with some of the best and has a very good chance of coming out with her hand raised after Saturday afternoon, I suppose it will be. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Pedro Falco and Victor Hugo. Hugo, the minus 135 favorite. Pedro Falco, the plus 114 underdog. Let's start off with Pedro Falco, 16-3 as a professional, 31 years old. 6 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 5 decisions in his professional career. This is going to be his UFC debut. He was in the Contender Series back in 2021. Got a 3rd-round TKO victory over James Barnes. He comes in by way of Shudo Brazil and most recently the Tough Enough organization with some hyphens in there. And, the vast majority of his wins of late have been inside the distance, as the level of competition has increased. Interesting how that happens. And his last loss, his only loss since August of 2015, was because of a shoulder injury against Galian Alves. Keep in mind. Victor Hugo, 24-4 as a pro, 31 years old. 8 wins by knockout, 9 by submission, and 7 by decision. He comes in via the Contender Series as well, but has been on the Contender Series as of October 2023. He got a 2nd-round knee bar against Eduardo Matias Torres Count. Came in from Qualified. He was a journeyman kind of like around different organizations. Was in Aspera, Pancrase. Those are the two most notable organizations, if that tells you anything. But, he's had a very, a much longer professional career, and he actually hasn't lost since March of 2014. I see why. I do think that I understand why this is closely handicapped for sure. They both have pretty extensive professional records for not having, more than a Contender Series fight. I do think that they both have quality wins on the Contender Series, too. It's very comparable. I am just like a little bit more impressed, I think, with Pedro Falco's resume. At the same time, I think that Hugo's win on the Contender Series was a little bit more telling. And, this is a guy that hasn't lost in, for real and even longer. The organizations are a little bit more questionable, but ultimately I think the fight on the Contender Series was the real equalizer. And I think that, at least part of that was reflected in some of the fights that they were going to give Victor Hugo that got called off before this. I'll say Hugo actually wins this fight like 55 times out of 100. Minus 135, I think that's fine. Really, I would go Hugo inside the distance, or more specifically, Hugo by submission. For some reason, those props are not up right now. But that's how I would go. But because this one is so comparable, this is one that, like, other than those things that I mentioned, I'm not going to touch, I'm not going to get too risky or too wild on this one. Next up, we got a women's bantamweight matchup between Norma Dumont and Germaine de Randamie. I'm going to switch up that pronunciation. I'm going to say Randamie. I think that sounds better. I always forget to look up search the exact pronunciation of that, but Randamie, that sounds about right. Plus 114, the underdog, Norma Dumont, the minus 135 favorite. This is one where I feel like I could get suckered either way, and it scares me. So let's start with Germaine, all right? Germaine's last fight in the UFC, October of 2020, a third-round submission victory against Juliana Pena, choked her unconscious in that fight. The crazier thing, too, there are two fighters in the UFC ever since January of 2011 who have beaten Germaine. Names were Julia Budd, interestingly enough, and that was actually back in Strikeforce. We're actually back to Strikeforce in that one. The other one is Amanda Nunes, twice. The first one by first-round knockout, the second by unanimous decision in December 2019 for the title is when that happened. And then in the UFC, Germaine's beaten Larissa Pacheco, Holly Holm, Raquel Pennington, Aspen Ladd, and Juliana Pena. Germaine is now in 20 days, Germaine will be 40 years old. And she is now, a little close to 4 years separated from her last fight in the UFC. Norma Dumont, born in 1990. She's actually, I feel like Norma sometimes can feel like a big fighter for this weight, but she is going to be smaller than Germaine, at least in height. And I believe the reach is, Germaine will have the 4-inch reach advantage. Norma on a 3-fight winning streak and has in fact won 6 of her last 7 fights. That streak was 3 decision victories over Ashley Evans-Smith, Felicia Spencer, and Aspen Ladd. She drops a split decision to Macy Chiasson in between there in May in 2022. And then another 3-fight winning streak right now, unanimous decision victories against Danielle Wolfe, Carol Rosa, and Chelsea Chandler. So the only 2 fighters that have beat Norma Dumont in the UFC are Macy Chiasson and Megan Anderson, which is... very respectable. The wins, Felicia Spencer, Aspen Ladd, Carol Rosa, those are, 3 very fantastic. And, this is a fight where I feel like, I think maybe it was like against Macy. Was that like, did that end up being like some sort of like number 1 contender fight or something? Like, maybe not. Because, let's see. Now I'm into this. Macy, when she beat Norma, she wanted to fight Irene Aldana, and I feel like that was maybe a little bit closer. So that makes sense. This is such a tough one because every time the opponent that it has taken to beat Jermaine is insane. Because you have to go back over a decade to find that loss to Julia Budd. And I love Julia Budd, and she's done great things in other organizations as well. And then the only other fighter is Amanda Nunes. 2020 seems recent enough when you're talking about Jermaine, but that's still almost 4 years ago. That submission victory over Juliana Pena. A lot happened for Juliana in that time in between. Norma has been, pretty active. She fought twice last year, won both by unanimous decision against solid opponents. It's just this thing is stuck in my head of, looking back, and even though she's almost 40, do you take a shot on Jermaine? It seems crazy. I think that you have to. Honestly, I think that the pedigree is just still there. And until we see someone else besides Amanda Nunes in the UFC beat Jermaine, I think when you can get her at plus money, I think you do that. I think this is close to a 50-50 fight, honestly. And maybe it'll prove really wrong, and it'll be that Jermaine is actually over the hill at that point and can't compete at this level anymore. But I think that at plus 114, it's still worth taking a shot on. Hit it. Ow! Next up, we got a welterweight matchup between Court McGee and Alex Morono. Morono, the minus 290 favorite. Court McGee, the plus 235 underdog. Let's start with Court McGee real quick. Let's get this out of the way, too, because he's going to be 40 this year as well. Came into the Ultimate Fighter, beating Chris McRae in the finale. That was when Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz were the coaches again. We're just the coaches. Has been in the UFC since 2010. Best wins he beat Robert Whittaker back in August of 2013. Really, the wins aren't that good. Going back to 2010, Court McGee does not even have that many wins in the UFC. It's been a lot. Everybody loves him. I love him. Losses to Ben Saunders, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Sean Strickland, Diego Lima, Sean Brady, Carlos Condit, Jeremiah Wells, and Matt Brown. Coming off those two straight losses, the last ones that I just mentioned, by first-round knockout. Last win was against Ramiz Brahimaj. Back in January 2022, he got a knockdown and 5 takedowns en route to that one. Beat Claudio Silva before that. The problem is, this is a fight just way too much designed to be a fight that Alex Morono wins, which is really puzzling. Why would you do that? People love Court McGee. It just seems like a very strange matchup to give him. Alex Morono did just come off the loss to Joaquin Buckley by unanimous decision, and beat Tim Means before that with a second-round guillotine. The third-round knockout loss to Ponzinibbio, though, as well. But then he had the 4-fight winning streak before that started with Cowboy and was preceded by the loss to Anthony Pettis. This is a guy that has sneakily fought a lot of, not the top guys at welterweight and whatnot, but a lot of guys that are exciting fighters to watch and have hung around for a while. I think that there's nothing to do here except for go Alex Morono minus 290 and use that in a parlay, and I think that you go with Alex Morono 2 in DFS. I think that this one is just a bit too unpredictable to try to pick a method of victory for. I think that this could end in the first round. It could end in the last seconds of the third round. Those are the kind of guys that both of these dudes are. I think Court McGee could survive, an onslaught, make it way further than he's supposed to. I think Morono could snap on a quick submission, on the first takedown attempt that Court McGee throws. So that's where I land on that one. Don't take too many crazy risks on this one, but I do think Alex Morono minus 290. I think he wins this fight 85 times out of 100 right now. So use that to string something together, get a little bit more for it. Next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Trevor Peek and Charlie Campbell. Trevor Peek, the plus 150 underdog. Charlie Campbell, the minus 180 favorite. Let's start with Charlie Campbell. Charlie the Cannibal Campbell lost his UFC debut, or actually in the Contender Series, got knocked out in the first round by Chris Duncan. Coming off a first-round knockout win over Alex Reyes at UFC Fight Night Grasso versus Shevchenko, outstriking Reyes 43-14 with a knockdown. Trevor Peek, Winner of 3 out of 4 fights in the UFC, including the Contender Series. Second round knockout against Malik Lewis on the Contender Series. His UFC victories have been a first round knockout against Eric Gonzalez. He did get taken down 4 times, but he landed 2 knockdowns en route to finishing that one. And then is coming off a unanimous decision victory over Muhammad Yahya, outstriking him 61-43, 4 takedowns to 1. He did lose to Chepe Mariscal in between there by unanimous decision in a fight where, he was, that was one where he was thoroughly beaten, but he remained exciting and still remained dangerous in a lot of parts. I think that's the important part. I can't believe I'm going so underdog heavy right now because it's against a lot of instincts. But why am I supposed to believe that Charlie Campbell should be a minus 180 favorite? Alex Reyes is now 0-2 in the UFC. Now, his debut was against Mike Perry. I don't want to hold that too strongly against him. That was a little bit too much for him. But Trevor Peek at this point has definitely given you enough in his striking volume, the power that he possesses. This is when you can get a junkyard dog like Trevor Peek, and by the way, Dakota Decheva just won in the first round by knockout in PFL. Sweet to see. But if you can get a junkyard dog against an unproven opponent early in their UFC career at plus money, give it to me all day. Trevor Peek.
One comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
And I know that he's not. Trevor Peek wins this fight 60 times out of 100. Plus 150. Hit it. Ow! Next up, we got a heavyweight matchup between Lucas Brzeski and Walter Walker. Walker, the minus 238 favorite. Brzeski, the plus 195 underdog. Let's start off with Lucas Brzeski. 1-3 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series because he had to get in with the win over Dylan Potter by third round rear naked choke. 3 straight losses, and this is a guy that has bounced around between heavyweight and light heavyweight. Landed 118 strikes on Martin Bidet, but the way that Martin Bidet fights, he just won 2 out of 3 rounds with the way that he slows production. So, that was a split decision loss. He gets lose a unanimous decision to Carl Williams after that. Got outstruck 38-26, got knocked down once, taken down 8 times. And then a first round knockout loss to Waldo Cortez Acosta, August of 2023. This is a guy that has, I will say, had the misfortune of facing a guy like Bidet, who I think is a prospect like that, or not Brzeski, a newcomer like that's, a huge nightmare if you can't overwhelm him and put him away like we did see his last time out against Shamil Gaziev. I think that, Bidet is can be a really tough test for newcomers to the UFC who aren't necessarily top prospect talent. And then he did have to face, 2 of the, more new up-and-coming guys, even though, regardless of what you think of, some of their last performances, especially Waldo's, Carl Williams and Waldo Cortez Acosta are tough fights to get. Walter Walker, making his UFC debut, he is the favorite, 11-0 as a professional, 26 years old, weighs in, let's see, what was his last weigh-in? It says 265, so, seems like a big heavyweight. And he is 6'6". Jesus Christ. What I would say to Lucas Brzeski.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
But I simply can't. Walter Walker came in through Titan FC. He was in MMA series as well. Fought with them for a long time. For a handful of fights. His professional career has been rather young. But a young professional career, at least a solid record on the opponents that he faced over his last 3 fights. He was the MMA series heavyweight champion, and then won the Titan FC heavyweight championship against Alex Nicholson in round 4 back in June of 2023. Yeah, I think, again, Lucas Brzeski is going to fall victim to, what is, he's got to, because he's not of that, because we know that Lucas Bresky has a ceiling and has these limits, he's going to have to really earn every fight that he gets in the UFC and scrap for it. And this is the kind of fight that it's like, okay, like, you're going to have to take on this guy now, whose nickname, Walter Walker, is the Clean Monster, which is terrifying because I don't know why he's the Clean Monster. His last 4 wins have all been of, knockout, TKO, retirement of some sort. And Bresky, I think that this is just too much for him again. If Waldo was by that much, if Bidet was able to control him, I think that Walter Walker is just a step ahead at 11-0 as a professional. So Walter Walker, minus 238, I think he wins this fight like 75, 80 times out of 100. I think that you go Walker inside the distance, plus 100, I think is your best route method of victory. I think he's going to be popular on DFS this week as well. It's just hard to see Lucas Bresky getting a win at the UFC level anymore after these last 3. It's just hard when you go on a losing streak after your only win was in the Contender Series. Next up, a lightweight matchup between Ignacio Bahamondes and Christos Giagos. How do I only have 4 fights left? Well, that went quickly. Bahamondes, the minus 340 favorite. Giagos, the plus 270 underdog. Let's start with Christos Giagos. Always a tough guy, especially at plus money. Winner at 3 of his last 6 fights at the UFC level, starting with Carlton Minus and Sean Soriano. That was back in May of 2021. Then lost 2 in a row to Arman Tsarukyan and Thiago Moises. Got put away in the first round of each. Got a first-round knockout victory over Ricky Glenn at UFC Fight Night Pavlovich vs. Blades April of last year. Now he's coming off a second-round Anaconda choke loss to Daniel Zellhuber last September. This is a guy that's been around for a long time, too. His first fight in the UFC was 2014 against Gilbert Burns. And he's fought Charles Oliveira as well, wins over Damir Hadzlovich, Mizoto Hirota. So Giagos is a guy that has been able to play like kind of this weird spoiler a couple of times. And, it's like when he's paired against people that he should be very even with, he seems to come out on top. When it's someone who's more talented than him or further along and they're, fighting down and in rankings, so to speak, it doesn't tend to go well for him. Bahamondes, on the other hand, winner at 3 of his last 4 fights. His first loss in the UFC was to John McDessie by split decision. He did land 112 strikes in that one. And the striking volume is what makes Ignacio so appealing in DFS, depending on the price that you get him at, because I think he's going to be pretty expensive. But he had 3 straight victories against Roosevelt Roberts, Zhu Rong, and Trey Ogden. He landed 99, 126, and 105 strikes in those fights. 2 of them didn't even go the distance. He got a third-round knockout against Roosevelt Roberts and a third-round submission against Zhu Rong. Now, he is coming off 1 loss against Ludwig Klein, who outstruck him 56-43, 3 takedowns to 0, en route to a unanimous decision victory. That was, I think that caught a handful of people by surprise for sure. A handful. It caught plenty of people by surprise. And I just remember, it just seemed like he could not find his range against Ludwig Klein. It seemed like Ludwig Klein really controlled, the entire environment of that fight. It was very frustrating, when you pick Ignacio in that one, and it just felt like he was not going to be able to get it going. I think that Giagos is, a good matchup for Ignacio to get back in the swing of things. I think it's set up well for him to be able to get, an inside-the-distance victory, or at the very least land upwards of 90-plus strikes against Giagos and round to a decision victory. I just think, maybe this is a situation, too, where you go Ignacio, minus 340 in a parlay for him, but even that, I still think that's a very, very high number because Giagos has proven tricky. I still have to opt for Ignacio. I think he probably wins this fight 85 times out of 100. I would probably say Ignacio inside the distance, or that's minus 120, but by knockout is plus 140. It's probably the better number. And then, in DFS, I really like him. Giagos plus 270. I don't know. If they got to plus 300, I'd think about it. But I think that Ignacio is beyond that. And I think it's a little bit too much force and power and talent for Giagos to overcome. Next up, 3 fights remaining. We got a featherweight matchup between Morgan Charrier, a highly touted European prospect, and Chepe Mariscal. Mariscal, the plus 105 underdog. Morgan Charrier, the minus 125 favorite. Let's start with Chepe Mariscal. Winner at 2 in a row at the UFC level. Very impressive victories, 2 against Trevor Peek by unanimous decision. Again, outstriking him 71-51, taking down 4 times to 0. And then getting a second-round knockout against Jack Jenkins September of last year. Jenkins was coming off 3 straight victories, including a win over Jamal Emmers and Don Shanis before that. So 2 off the bat wins that people didn't expect him to get, and it took a lot from him, but those were very impressive wins and already, a credible resume for Chepe. Charrier debuted in the UFC September of last year with a first-round knockout victory over Manolo Zaccini. Prior to that fight, he's 19-9-1 as a pro, 28 years old. Was the Cage Warriors. Oh, no, he wasn't a champion in Cage Warriors. Look at that. Yeah, he was a featherweight champion in Cage Warriors. Okay. Lost the belt. Never really fought again for it. That's interesting enough. I think that he might have, gone up in weight class at some point to lightweight in between like 2022 and 2023, I think it was. But he's in Cage Warriors for a long time, had a lot of fights there, has a lot of pro fights, for a dude that's 28. It seems like that maybe is less common now. But, he's racking up a good number of them. He racked up a good number of them over in Europe. Against Manolo Zaccini, he finished that fight early in round 1 with kicks to the body. Career-wise, 11 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 5 by decision. And in fact, his last 3 wins had been by first-round knockout. But look, anytime anybody was at a championship level in Cage Warriors, that is enough for me to think, to at least give great respect to your name coming into the UFC after already collecting a win. Normally, this wouldn't be so tough, but Chepe is a very interesting opponent in the last 2 wins that he's gotten. And coming out of LFA and Combate Global, Cage Warriors in his own right, Cage Fury, LFA, this guy's bounced around to a lot of really good organizations. His only 3 losses, at least since... No, actually, you go back. Out of nowhere, Chepe Mariscal, here are just a handful of his losses that he took before he got to the UFC. In Ring of Combat, a loss to Gregor Gillespie. In V3 fights, a loss to Bryce Mitchell. LFA 65, a loss to Yo Anderson Brito. LFA 80, a loss to Steve Garcia. And Cage Fury 85, a loss to Sean Soriano. You go back this guy's entire career, he's only lost to UFC level competition. And now, on a 5-fight winning streak, knocking off Jack Jenkins, the guy that had way more hype going into that fight last time out. You got to put great respect on that dude too. And, Chepe, the plus 105 underdog, I think this is about a 50-50 fight. I think Morgan Charrier is the more likely of the two to get an inside-the-distance victory. By knockout. I think that's the most likely method of victory. Charrier by knockout is plus 300. I think that's a solid number. But honestly, I think this is about a 50-50 fight. I think Chepe plus 105 is a very solid number. But honestly, I don't think there's any losing picks in this fight. I think I can pretty much see a rationale very equally for both guys. I think that I would go Chepe just because, we don't know as much yet. We've seen what Chepe can do and against the 2 opponents that he's beaten in Jenkins and Peak. Charrier still has a little bit more to prove, as impressive as he was in Cage Warriors. So he's rightfully the very, very, very minimal favorite. But I think Chepe is a good number, plus 105. Very, very interested to see the results of that one. Co-main event of the evening. We got a featherweight matchup between Alexander the Great Hernandez, minus 205, the favorite, against Damon Jackson, the plus 170 underdog. Alexander Hernandez and Damon Jackson have been barbing at each other back and forth in the press conference. It was some silly beef that they were talking about. Really, the beef isn't interesting, but the fact that they apparently don't like each other makes the fight infinitely more interesting, as it always does. Let's start off with Damon Jackson, the person who I somehow thought was cringier than Alexander Hernandez up there. And I like Damon Jackson. I mean, he had 4 wins in a row from October 2021 to September of 2022 against Charles Rosa, Camilla Kirk, Dan Argueta, and Pat Sabatini. He is coming off 2 straight losses to Dan Ige by second-round knockout and Billy Quarantillo by unanimous decision August of last year. Took 2 losses in 2023 against the best level of competition that he's ever faced. At least, he did lose to Ilia Topuria back in December 2020, but, arguably not. He wasn't yet at that point. But, 2 very understandable losses for Damon Jackson, born in 1988. Alexander Hernandez, born in 1992, only has 1 win in the last 4 fights. This guy was win-loss for a while, and then it was win-loss, win-loss. Since February of 2022. This guy's had to fight some tough fighters for sure. You go back, his first 2 wins in the UFC, his first 2 fights in the UFC, wins over Beneil Dariush and Olivier Aubin-Mercier. Then he takes that loss to Cowboy, beats Francisco Trinaldo, loses to Drew Dober. A win over Chris Grutzmacher, lost to Thiago Moises, beats Mike Breeden. Loses 2 in a row to Renato Moicano and Billy Quarantillo, and now he's coming off a loss by unanimous decision to Bill Algeo October of last year. His only win in that stretch since October of 2021 is Jim Miller, who he outstruck 108 to 67 February of last year, UFC Fight Night Andrade versus Blanchfield. So, I think that you have to go Hernandez here. I don't necessarily care that Billy Quarantillo knocked out Hernandez and he only beat Damon Jackson by decision. I think that is very much a symptom of their fighting styles. Hernandez has had to fight the way better competition. The dude is 32. It's not like it seems like he's still young, but it seems like he's been around forever. At this guy's best, he absolutely beats better opponents than Damon Jackson beats at his best. I think that maybe minus 205 is way too big of a number, but it's just hard to tell because both of these guys, not like the recent success, and Hernandez has just never been able to string it together consistently, but he seems to always bounce back. Never goes too long without a loss. The key to hanging around. I don't know, man. That's a tough one. I think Hernandez could overwhelm Damon Jackson, and 2 of his last 3 wins were by knockout. 2 of his last 3. The last one was by unanimous decision against Jim Miller. This is maybe the toughest fight for me to call right now. I think that you have to just opt for the fact that, regardless of the result against Billy Quarantillo, even Damon Jackson was doing all right against Dan Ige. I don't know. I don't like this one at all, honestly. I don't like picking this one, especially now that, I don't know how the emotions of whatever the hell these guys are feeling in their weird beef is going to get to each other or to themselves. I don't know. For Hernandez, it's just been so disappointing because he was in the rankings at one point. And it felt like, but coming into the Cowboy fight, it was he was riding such an impressive 2-fight winning streak to start in the UFC. And, give credit to him, he's remained, quite active, at least 2 fights a year. Just hasn't been able to get the wins lately. He got, he was being competitive against Moicano before he got subbed. It was a close decision loss to Thiago Moises. He got knocked out in the second round by Drew Dober. And, what is Damon Jackson? I mean, I guess the win against Pat Sabatini does really... Dude, I got to go with Damon Jackson, I guess. I think Damon Jackson wins 40 of these fights out of 100, 45 maybe. Plus 170. I dig it. Hit it. I can't believe I came around so strongly on that one, but it's I just don't trust Alexander Hernandez. I can't. How can you? At least Damon Jackson gave us a winning streak, a 4-fight winning streak. And the Pat Sabatini wins and Dan Argueta wins, that's enough for me when Alexander Hernandez has really struggled, against everybody but Jim Miller, who you would hope, that's just a bit beyond what Jim Miller in fights where people want to see him win. That's a little bit beyond maybe what he should have been matched up with. Yeah, give me Damon Jackson plus 170. I don't know how this one ends. I think by unanimous decisions, decent. I think by knockouts, decent too. But honestly, I don't care about the method of victory. Plus 170, and that's the only thing I'm touching on this one. And now, folks, we are to the main event of the evening as Liz Carmouche is walking out for her fight in PFL 1. But it is a middleweight rematch. Chance for vengeance for Brendan Allen against Chris Curtis, who beat him in an upset win the first time around.
Break out the red panties.
Brendan Allen is the minus 218 favorite. The Action Man plus 180. Let's talk about what these two have been up to in the time since they fought each other because it's been busy. Let's go to Brendan Allen. His last loss is Chris Curtis. December of 2021, that was now 6 fights ago for Brendan Allen. He has remained super active. 3 fights in 2022 and 3 in 2023. Wins in a row against Sam Alvey. Don't really care about that one as far as what it means for this one. Unanimous decision against Jacob Malkoum where he got taken down 7 times. Still got the judges' scorecards. Then 4 straight submission victories in the first, third, in that order against Christoph Jotko, Andre Muniz, Bruno Silva, and Paul Craig. Before then, obviously, Brendan Allen was in the rankings on his way up. He is a prospect of the middleweight class still, born in 1995. Wins over Kyle Dawkins. That first loss that derailed him was against Sean Strickland. Has beaten Kevin Holland and Aaron Jeffrey as well. The Action Man. The Action Man, the Action Journeyman. Once retired twice in the same night after losing twice in the same night. Ultimately made it into the UFC after several, several Contender Series appearances. Beat Phil Hawes by first round knockout. That was an upset at the time. Then he gets a knockout over Brendan Allen in the second round, December of 2021. That was an upset. Now, Chris Curtis is in the rankings and gets a unanimous decision victory over Rodolfo Vieira. Now, I think it took that win to get him into the rankings. And it seems like it was so recent. But that fight against Jack Hermanson is what derailed Chris Curtis. And it was a fight where we see those things about Chris Curtis that people don't like sometimes. You're not getting your offense going. You start flipping the dude off. And so the Chris Curtis love affair for, that year was kind of put to a bit of an end. And then the Sean Strickland, thing, that friendship rose, his fame, for sure. And he's out there a lot more. He bounced back with a second-round knockout victory over Joaquin Buckley. Unanimous decision loss to Kelvin Gastelum, April 2023 at UFC 287. Got outstruck 83-70. That was it. The no contest against Nasruddin Imavov, where he was getting outstruck 57-26, taken down 3 times to 0. But he did bounce back January of this year at UFC 297 with a split decision victory over Marc-Andre Barriault. So, I think it's too good of a story, right? I would love to say, Brendan Allen, his last loss was Chris Curtis. This would make it 7 wins in a row, with an impressive winning streak of opponents, making his way up the middleweight division. That fight wasn't that long ago, though. And Chris Curtis has, bounced around and fought better opponents than Brendan Allen has fought in that time. Because he got put on a bit more of a fast track and got bigger fights, with those big upsets that he pulled. I think that this matchup remains not a great stylistic matchup for Brendan Allen. I think if Brendan Allen can get into the ground, I think a submission is always in play. I think that, his stand-up style is not conducive to fighting against Chris Curtis in the way that he boxes and the way that he lands his hard shots. I think that, Brendan Allen beating Paul Craig at middleweight, Bruno Silva, Andre Muniz, those are meaningful wins. But, Chris Curtis in that time got wins over Joaquin Buckley, who looked like way better. That wasn't middleweight still, granted. And beating Marc-Andre Barriault is always a tough task. That's a guy that's always deceptively difficult. You always got to watch out for him. And it was a competitive fight against Kelvin Gastelum. And, Jack Hermanson is just a tier above. A slight tier above, but a tier above nonetheless. I think this is still a matchup for Chris Curtis. I think over the course of 5 rounds, I think that this is a fight that Chris Curtis, finishes. The action man, I think, wins this fight 50 to 55 times out of 100, plus 180. Give it to me. If I'm going to method of victory, I'm going Curtis by TKO knockout, plus 300. By decision is plus 650. Honestly, I don't love that over the course of 5 rounds. Stepping in on late notice is just weird enough for Chris Curtis's run in the UFC to actually be in his favor. I think that you got to roll with that weird, late replacement statistics are not good for fighters. But I think that for a guy like Chris Curtis, they've proven to be a good thing for him. So I think you dive into that. I think if you're going Brendan Allen, you go Allen by submission plus 175. I think that's actually probably the method of victory that's the most likely out of those options. But I think Curtis by TKO knockout is very close, if not even with it. And DFS-wise, I think you're going to have to incorporate one of those two dudes. I think that Curtis belongs in there. I think that, Brendan Allen, I think for what his price is going to be, is not going to be worth it to me when I think that there's a lot of... But there's also a lot of really good bargains this week in DFS. I can definitely see that. So you're going to have to pick your expensive spots carefully to make sure you're making the best use of that, because you can make an entire very winnable lineup of just, $12 to $17 options, I feel like, on this card. But, folks, that is it for UFC Vegas 90, episode 131 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. Again, follow me on Twitter, at RotoBrady, for all my picks on major MMA events, major boxing events, all things combat sports. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. Show up to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday afternoon and onward. Let's talk about UFC Vegas 90 on Saturday.
Break out the red panties.
Listen to my BYB fighting interviews as well with the 4 title challengers in that organization. They're fighting for the titles tonight, so need to check up on those results. Folks, thanks for listening. Have yourselves a great weekend. Enjoy all the combat sports that are flying at you. Peace.